Hi everyone and welcome to our latest webinar. Today we are joined by Will Eastman, who heads up our legal and claims team at Homelet. Will's team deal with all of the rent guarantee claims for Homelet across all of our rent guarantee products. Morning Will, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, good, thank you. So we've asked Will to join us today, ready to chat through the impacts of COVID-19 on our rent and legal claims team. And really just talk through the challenges and changes to dealing with tenant evictions. Obviously, as we all know, rent guarantee is a hot topic at the moment due to current climates. And we just thought it would be useful for Will to share some information on what we're experiencing here at Homelet. So, Will, talk us through then the start of lockdown back in March and what impact that had on our claims team.
Okay, so 23rd of March is probably a date we all remember, probably won't forget for some time. And I think the key thing for everyone when we first entered lockdown was how we get our operations at home working effectively and doing what we need to do to keep surviving and adapting. And we were no different to that. So for us, we have across the group 40 claims team members, and it was important for us to get them mobilised, safe at home, and that was probably our first challenge. So we got all of those at home, and then as we sort of moved from March into April, that's when I think we saw our peak. So we had over the April, May, June period, we had about 140% increase in our claims coming in. So of course, not only working from home and meeting that challenge, but then meeting the challenge of more tenants missing their rent payments, whether that be because they're on furlough or losing work, that sort of thing. And that was, I suppose, made a little bit worse by the fact that courts then decided to sort of ground to a halt. No court proceedings were taking place, no evictions were taking place. So tenants unable to pay the rent and not much for landlords to be able to do to rectify that.
Okay, so obviously during those first periods, and what was the sort of the major changes that we had to make to the actual claims process to sort of adapt the process to suit obviously the changes in legislation, etc.
So I think for us, we found it really difficult to put any strict, set, documented process in place. Things were changing weekly, if not more often. I mean, as you work through a bit of a timeline, we had no courts open, no bailiffs doing the appointments, evicting tenants. We then had notice periods change from, on a Section 8, from 2 weeks to 3 months, and then again to 6 months. And Section 21's followed suit from 2 to 3 and then to 6. So the changes in the guidance that was given to landlords, letting agents changed frequently, and we had to stay flexible to adapt to that. I think there was lots of changes, but probably one of the key ones for us was the level of engagement that we needed to have with policyholders, customers, and tenants. There was very, very little we could do by way of legal proceedings, and getting them conversations going and having that communication really helped.
And how was the morale within the team, Will? You know, was it challenging for them, or did they generally cope okay?
I think it was probably challenging for everyone in their own way, whether that's professional or personal, but I think we've got a really good team. There was a really good vibe all pulled together, and a real sense of family spirit, which I think we saw not just here at Homelet, but in the nation. A lot of people pulled together to get through the pandemic. It was something new, something no one had ever been through. So yeah, there was a really good vibe within the team and a real pull together to be flexible and do what's right for our customers.
Okay, and how important do you think it is for an agent or a landlord to use a company that are experts in dealing with evictions rather than maybe just general other solicitors, etc., what they deal with?
I think it's hugely important. So not wanting to take away from solicitors, they've worked hard to get where they are and to sort of specialise in their areas, but what we do is very unique. So landlord and tenant law is a very small part of the legal system. It's very unique and niche, and that's what we live and breathe every day, handling disputes between tenants and landlords, and handling rent guarantee claims. So we don't dabble in anything else. We don't have different areas of specialism. It's just that one area that we focus on. And let's face it, landlords and letting agents have a very difficult time in the best of lets. So you're letting a property and most of them have no problems, but it's still a very complex process for them to let a property, whether that be guidance, regulations, legislation. And that's why landlords trust their agents. And that's why I hope that landlords and agents can trust people like us to handle their rent guarantee claims and manage that legal process through to eviction.
And I guess for landlords as well, it's obviously quite a stressful period, isn't it? Where the rent's maybe not being received and they've got their own, money requirements, mortgages, etc. So, I guess it's quite a stressful time for them.
Yeah, most landlords we see come through our sort of claims process and that we speak to throughout a claim, they're not landlords with huge portfolios of properties. It's probably their only property and they may never have been through that process before. And it's quite daunting for them. Even the thought of having to go to court or issue legal proceedings is quite a daunting aspect for them as part of that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, as we've moved through, obviously the first lockdown, what would you say are the biggest differences now then between dealing with an eviction now and pre-COVID?
I think there's lots of differences. I mean, we've mentioned a little bit about the change in notice periods. There's obviously things like the NRLA's 9 golden rules and what's expected of people pre-action. There's a huge focus now on engaging with tenants, and a lot of good landlords and reputable landlords and agents were doing that already. I think it's the closure of courts or the less availability of courts has forced the issue a bit more. But the engagement is a big piece pre-action. And now it's no longer issue a notice, issue legal proceedings and turn up on the day and ask for a possession order. In most cases now they've inserted a step in for a review hearing. So you issue your application and then you have a review hearing, usually over the telephone, before the court or the judge on the day will decide whether it should go to what is a substantive hearing now. So it can take longer. I think there's lots of changes within that in guidance and legislation and process, but I think the biggest impacting change here is the length of time it will now take a landlord to get from start to finish and get their property back. And that comes with a huge financial burden, not only for the landlord, but for the tenants too. They're obviously racking up a debt in rent arrears. And are they going to be able to afford it in the future? Who knows? I think we will feel the impact of rent arrears and missed rental payments for months, if not a couple of years to come.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously there was the Christmas winter truce in sort of introduced, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, was it the start of December until January? How's that going to impact the eviction process and the timelines, etc.?
I think it's probably ironic that it's called a winter truce, because I think if you work back through the history of the pandemic, there's been very little by way of bailiff evictions since the 23rd of March. So as we entered the pandemic, there was very little by way of bailiff evictions. The law, that was then extended. So we thought it was only for a period of time and it was extended again. You then had a period of time where the Lord Chancellor had written to High Court enforcement officers and bailiffs and asked them not to enforce warrants or writs of possession. So you had that period. We then went into another lockdown, which again, we couldn't, bailiffs weren't going out at that point. We could apply, but bailiffs were not scheduling appointments or enforcing warrants. And then it was around the 5th of November, I think, that the Lord Chancellor wrote out again asking that bailiffs didn't enforce warrants, except in very specific circumstances. So substantial rent arrears, I think, was one of them, which was 9 months worth of rent arrears before the pandemic. So not including any rent arrears from March, antisocial behaviour and some fraud grounds. So since the 23rd of March, we've had not a great deal, if any. And then we get to coming out of the second lockdown and what was thought to be unlawful stopping of evictions. There was quite a lot of social media activity on whether it was lawful or not. That then got passed into some regulations, so it became lawful, and there is now no evictions until at least the 11th of January, except in them exceptions.
Okay, thank you, Will. And if you could give one piece of advice to a letting agent going through a claims process with Homelet, what would that one bit of advice be?
I think be specific and be open. So one of the challenges that have come out of the pandemic is that increased engagement with tenants, between tenants, letting agents and landlords. And it's a necessity before claims reach us on rent guarantee policies, and even before we get to issuing legal proceedings, that we've had meaningful discussions with those tenants. I mean, the only reason we have agreements is for when things go wrong, because when things go correct and everything that's agreed is dealt with, you don't need to rely on an agreement. But we've seen in recent claims, agents and landlords have tried really hard, invested a lot of time in conversations and compromise with tenants. Some tenants haven't been able to meet the agreements they've met, whether that be a reduced rent or a deferred amount, and the agreements aren't very specific. So as a third party looking in or expecting the court to sort of review that, it's not clear what was intended at the point. So be really specific in anything like repayment plans, deferral agreements. And if you're in any doubt, just let us know. So if there's an update in the tenant's contacted you or something like that, and you're not sure whether to let us know, then just let us know, because we'd rather know and be able to adapt the way we work than not know and it cause complications later down the line.
And what volume of payment plans have we seen or had fed back to us from agents? Has it been a higher volume than what you maybe anticipated, or a lower volume?
It's been huge for us. So like I say, we saw a really big increase in claims notifications back in April, May and June. And a great deal of those have dropped off with landlords and tenants being able to come to an arrangement. And I think there was a lot of panic in the first few weeks, which seemed to stem off as the government provided support. But absolutely, I think we've seen around between 40 and 50% of claims notified during that period have either withdrawn at some point or they're in repayment plans now and sticking to them. So a really good response.
Okay, obviously just a slightly different topic for a question, but what's the latest on the Section 21s being withdrawn? Is there any guidance or news or anything like that we could update our agents on?
I think the really short answer is not a great deal. It was announced about this time last year in the Queen's speech. There's been a couple of briefings, a couple of consultations that the industry have responded to, and not a great deal more than that, really. There was some recent talk about it when questions were put to the housing minister, and it's, for me, I think my opinion is it's a when rather than if. I think it will happen, but it's more of a when, and it depends how long the government spend managing the aftermath of the pandemic, and of course Brexit. There'll be two key influencing features of how quickly that turns around. But I don't think in my opinion, the next 6 or 12 months we'll see much on that. And hopefully that gives time for the Section 8 process and the courts to be properly funded and revamped. Okay,
I'm gonna ask you one final question then, Will, before we let you go. How important do you think it is to have rent guarantee, as a landlord?
At the risk of being biased, I think it's almost a no-brainer. For a small fee each month, your rent's protected, and you've got someone to manage that legal process. And without it, claims, the loss of rent at the moment and the legal costs incurred instructing a high street solicitor or something like that can be enormous. So for me, for a small fee each month, for letting agents and what landlords pay in their management fees, it's hugely important. No-brainer.
Okay, I'd concur with that as well, Will, without being biased as well. So appreciate your time. Obviously, we know you're really busy at the moment, so thanks for the updates. I think just from my perspective, obviously, if any any of our customers at Homelet or any other letting agents want to talk to us about rent guarantee, and how it can maybe enhance your proposition and safeguard your landlords, then please do get in touch. You're more than welcome to email me directly on chris.turner@homelet.co.uk. Thank you very much, Will. See you later.